Bob Dylan stopped mid-note. The guitar lowered to his waist. And he stared at a face he hadn't seen in 40 years, a face he never wanted to see again. The Warfield Theatre, San Francisco. November 1978. A small venue by Dylan's standards. 1,500 people packed into velvet seats and cramped balconies. The air thick with cigarette smoke and reverence. Dylan was 2 songs into his set. Tangled Up in Blue. The crowd knew every word but stayed quiet, letting him work. That was the unspoken rule at Dylan shows. You didn't sing along. You witnessed. He was halfway through the 3rd verse. His voice raspy, tired, carrying decades of road and smoke and words he'd sung 10,000 times. His fingers moved across the guitar strings with practiced muscle memory. His eyes half closed, looking at nothing, looking inward the way he always did. And then he saw him. Stage left. 3rd row. Aisle seat. A man in his 50s. Graying hair. Denim jacket. Hands folded in his lap. Not moving. Not applauding. Just sitting there. Watching. Dylan's voice caught. Not dramatically. Just a small hitch, the kind most people wouldn't notice. But the musicians behind him noticed. The sound engineer noticed. And the man in the 3rd row noticed. Dylan's fingers kept playing for another 3 seconds. Muscle memory carrying the song forward while his brain tried to process what his eyes were telling him. Then the guitar lowered. Slowly. Not dropped, not thrown down in anger. Just lowered. Until it hung at his waist, strings still vibrating faintly, the song dying in the air. The band continued for exactly 2 more bars before the confusion rippled backward through them. The bass player looked up. The drummer missed a beat. The keyboardist's hands lifted off the keys. Silence filled the Warfield Theatre. 1,500 people holding their breath, not understanding what they were witnessing but understanding that something had broken. Dylan stood there. Guitar hanging loose. Staring at the man in the 3rd row. The man stared back. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The microphone stood between them, abandoned. Dylan didn't explain himself. He never did. To understand what happened on that stage, you need to understand what happened in 1938. Not to Bob Dylan, he wasn't born yet. But to his father, Abe Zimmerman, and to the man sitting in the 3rd row, whose name was Samuel Roth. Abe Zimmerman and Samuel Roth grew up together in Duluth, Minnesota. Sons of Jewish immigrants. Best friends from childhood. They worked together in Abe's father's furniture store. They double-dated. They talked about opening their own business someday. 2 Jewish kids trying to make it in a cold Minnesota town that didn't always welcome them. In 1938, they both fell in love with the same woman. Beatty Stone. A secretary at the electric company. Dark hair. Quick laugh. She could make Abe forget his worries and Samuel forget his ambitions with a single smile. Abe married her in 1939. Samuel was supposed to be the best man. He didn't show up to the wedding. Didn't call. Didn't explain. He just left. Took a bus to Chicago and disappeared from Abe Zimmerman's life. Abe never spoke about it. Not to Beatty. Not to his children. Robert, born in 1941, and David, born in 1946. He kept the wound private, the way men of that generation did. He ran his furniture and appliance store. He raised his family. He pretended Samuel Roth had never existed. But Robert, who would become Bob Dylan, found the photographs when he was 12. A shoebox in the attic. Pictures of his father as a young man, laughing with another young man. Abe and Sam, 1937, written on the back in his father's handwriting. Other photos. The 2 of them on a fishing trip. At a baseball game. Standing in front of the furniture store. "Who's Sam?" Robert asked his mother. Beatty's face had closed like a door. "Someone your father used to know. Don't ask him about it." Robert never did. But he kept one of the photographs. Kept it when he left Duluth for Minneapolis. Kept it when he changed his name to Bob Dylan. Kept it through New York and Greenwich Village and the folk scene and the electric guitar and the motorcycle accident and the born-again years and everything that came after. He kept it because he understood, even at 12, what it meant to lose someone. To have them just disappear. To carry that absence like a weight. And now, 40 years after his father's best friend vanished, Samuel Roth was sitting in the third row of the Warfield Theatre, watching Abe Zimmerman's son stand frozen on stage. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. An eternity in a concert hall. Someone in the balcony coughed. The sound echoed in the stillness. Dylan's eyes hadn't left Samuel's face. Samuel hadn't looked away either. Two men. One famous, one anonymous, locked in a moment that belonged only to them, despite the 1,500 witnesses. Finally Dylan spoke. Not into the microphone. Just spoke. His voice barely carrying past the first few rows. You shouldn't be here. The words were quiet. Flat. Not angry. Not sad. Just true. Samuel Roth stood up. The movement was slow, careful, like he was trying not to startle a wounded animal. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in the third row, denim jacket and gray hair and 40 years of absence written on his face. The crowd was utterly silent now. Not the odd silence of a Dylan performance. This was different. Uncomfortable. People shifting in their seats, looking at each other, wondering if they should leave, if they were intruding on something private. Dylan lifted the guitar strap over his head. Set the guitar down on its stand. The movement was deliberate, careful. He walked to the edge of the stage. Sat down. His legs dangling over the side. 3 feet above where Samuel stood. How'd you find me? Dylan asked. Still quiet. Still without the microphone. Read about the show in the paper, Samuel said. His voice was rough, unpracticed. The voice of a man who didn't talk much. Came down from Eureka. Drove 4 hours. Why? Your father died last month. The words hung in the air. Dylan's expression didn't change. But something in his shoulders shifted. Collapsed inward, just slightly. I know, Dylan said. I was there. I wasn't invited to the funeral. You weren't invited to his life for 40 years. Why would the funeral be different? Samuel flinched. The words had landed like Dylan knew they would. Precise. Sharp. Not cruel, but honest in the way that hurts more than cruelty. I came to tell you something, Samuel said. About your father. About why I left. Dylan was quiet for a long moment. The band behind him had stopped pretending to know what to do. They just stood there, instruments in hand, watching their bandleader sit on the edge of the stage talking to a stranger. I don't want to know, Dylan finally said. You should. No. Dylan's voice was firm now. Whatever happened between you and my father died with him. That's where it should stay. It wasn't what you think. I don't think anything. I don't think about you at all. The lie was obvious. The fact that Dylan had stopped singing, stopped performing, stopped everything when he saw Samuel's face proved it was a lie. But Dylan said it anyway, the way people say true things that aren't facts. Samuel reached into his jacket pocket. Pulled out an envelope. Old yellowed paper. The kind of thing that had been carried around for decades. Your father wrote me a letter, Samuel said. 3 months before he died. Sent it to my last known address. Took 2 years to find me. I'd moved 4 times by then. But it found me. Last June. He held the envelope out toward Dylan. Dylan didn't take it. He wanted me to give you something. Samuel continued. Said if anything happened to him, I should find you and give it to you. Said it was important. Said. His voice cracked. Said he was sorry. Dylan stared at the envelope. Sorry for what? For making you choose. Away from the spotlight, Dylan made a choice no one expected. Dylan stood up, brushed off his jeans, looked out at the audience, 1,500 people who had come to hear music and instead were watching something they didn't understand and would never forget. "We're gonna take a break," Dylan said into the microphone. Just those words. No explanation. No apology. He picked up his guitar, walked off stage left, and was gone. The house lights came up. The crowd erupted into confused conversation. The band members looked at each other, shrugged, and headed backstage. Samuel Roth stood alone in the third row, envelope still in his hand. 10 minutes passed. 15. People started leaving. Not everyone, some stayed, hoping Dylan would come back. Others figured the show was over, that whatever they just witnessed was all they were going to get. Samuel sat back down, placed the envelope on the empty seat beside him, folded his hands in his lap, and waited. 23 minutes after he'd walked off stage, Bob Dylan came back. Not to the stage. To the third row. He walked down the aisle, guitar slung over his shoulder, and stopped in front of Samuel. "Come with me," Dylan said. They walked backstage together. Through the warren of dressing rooms and equipment storage and cramped hallways that smell like old wood and electrical equipment. Dylan opened a door to a small room, barely bigger than a closet. A folding chair. A mirror with lights. A table with a half-empty water bottle. They went inside. Dylan closed the door. "Show me," Dylan said. Samuel handed him the envelope. Dylan opened it carefully, the way you open something you're afraid might break. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. His father's handwriting, shaky now, near the end, but still recognizable. Dylan read it. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened on the paper. When he finished, he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Handed it back to Samuel. "He wanted you to know," Samuel said quietly. "Before he died. He tried to tell you, but he couldn't find the words. The words were always his problem," Dylan said. "He kept everything locked up. All those years. All that silence. He was ashamed. He shouldn't have been. I know. But he was from a different time. Different rules." Dylan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "What did he give you?" The letter said there was something else. Samuel reached into his other pocket, pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth, unwrapped it carefully. A harmonica. Old, worn, the metal tarnished with age and use. "He said this was the first instrument he ever gave you," Samuel said. "When you were 7. Said you played it until you wore it out. He kept it all these years." Dylan took the harmonica. Held it like it might disappear. "He wanted you to have it back," Samuel said. "Said maybe you'd remember who you were before you became who you are." What followed stayed with everyone who witnessed it, long after the sound faded. Dylan and Samuel talked for 40 minutes in that small room. What they said, no one knows. Dylan never spoke about it. Samuel went back to Eureka and never gave an interview. When Dylan finally walked back onto the Warfield stage, only about 800 people were left. Half the crowd had gone home. The ones who stayed didn't know if he'd come back or not. But they'd waited anyway. Dylan sat down on a stool. No band. Just him and his guitar. And the old harmonica, now resting on a small table beside him. He didn't explain. Didn't apologize. He just started playing. The times they are changin' dot. But different. Slower. Quieter. Like he was singing it to his father, who wasn't there to hear it. When he finished, he picked up the harmonica. Played a single note. Long sustained. The same note his father had taught him to play 40 years ago. Then he set it down. Stood up. And walked off stage. The 800 people who stayed didn't applaud. They just sat there, understanding they'd witnessed something that wasn't meant for them. Share and subscribe, Some stories deserve to be remembered. Samuel Roth left San Francisco the next morning. Dylan never saw him again. Samuel died in 1984. In his will, he left everything to Robert Zimmerman, $17.43 in a checking account, and one photograph from 1937. Two young men standing outside a furniture store, smiling. Dylan keeps that photograph in his turquoise. And the harmonica. He's never played it on stage again. But he carries it. Always.